Robert spent 20 years working in social services for the governor of New York in various leadership positions, and also for the mayor of New York City. So he worked for the state of New York, worked for the city of New York. Robert came to the American Enterprise Institute in 2014. So Robert came to AEI specifically for the purpose of beefing up AEI's work on poverty and poverty solutions, gaining a greater understanding that could be shared with other leaders, not just on Capitol Hill, but really around the country, ways in which we might address issues of poverty. So AEI's Poverty Studies program and the scholars in it have since become leading voices in the national discussion on how we address many of these issues, and Robert has absolutely been the point man on all of that. While at AEI, he also served as co-chair of the National Commission on Hunger and as a lead member of the AEI Brookings Working Group on Poverty and Opportunity. Now, the big news this year is that earlier in the year, the board of directors selected Robert to become the new president and CEO of the American Enterprise Institute. So he succeeded Arthur Brooks. Those are huge shoes to fill. Robert's up to the task. We've known him for years, so congratulations.
Thank you, and it's an interesting story. You know, I have a few. First of all, I want to thank you for having me, Randy, and thank you for all the work that you do. And I feel that in this audience of people that are working in community-based and faith-based and other locally based efforts to help struggling Americans, that I have a few marks against me. You know, I'm from New York. That's one problem. I worked in government. That's another problem. And now I work for a think tank in Washington, and that actually could be another one, is how far removed from the reality of life in America can you get? But the message of what the American Enterprise Institute Board did in selecting me to be the leader for the next period of time is really an important one. We are a right of center, limited government, economic opportunity for all, conservative-leaning research institute in Washington. And when they did their national search for the next president, they picked somebody who had spent his life working for the least among us, for those who struggle the most in America, and trying to help them move up through work and opportunity and family formation. And I think that's a strong and good message, because I happen to believe that the things that AEI scholars have written about and talked about, the research that we've brought to light concerning the importance of family or the importance of employment, the success sequence, which I know you guys make a great statement about. Those are the right solutions to help people, but they also require a big heart and a commitment at the local and community-based level from the non-governmental world to help as well, because government can do some things well and some things not so well, but we really don't succeed, and I learned this in New York, we really don't succeed in helping people move up unless we have a really great and strong civil society and faith-based institutions helping people on a one-to-one basis. Government can write a check, government can fund a program, but it can't help a person get a job or help a child learn to read. And that happens at the local level in an individual experience.
No, it's interesting. William Temple was the Archbishop of Canterbury in the UK back around World War II. And one of the comments he made was really interesting. And he would, from a political perspective, probably today be viewed as being left of center. But here's what he said that I thought was really interesting. He said that government at its best can deal with people as they are, but it's communities of faith that can deal with people as they ought to be. And a lot of that simply has to do with the fact that you're able to get close to people. It's what we've been talking about all day. It's that soil, right, that we started the whole day talking about. It's civil society coming together and developing relationships.
But I would say that government also has to send the right messages and have the right attitude about the potential and dignity of every individual. And I think that when government has taken the attitude that individuals are liabilities to be managed, are people to be made dependent on government, they are wards of the state, they send the wrong message to people who are seeking opportunity and move up. So I have been a believer that some programs can work, but they should work when they treat people as if they have potential. And that means saying, if you seek assistance or want assistance from a government program, we're going to ask that you do something too. That personal responsibility, participation in a work activity, participating in training education on a regular basis, that's going to be part of the arrangement. And that was foreign to New York City when I started in this in the late 1990s. The idea that it was a two-way street, that there was reciprocal responsibility, and that government needed to send that message was not part of the way in which we did welfare back then. And we made it a little bit different in that regard. And what happened was that a lot of people who a lot of American leaders had given up on, who said they can't do it, don't ask them to work because they can't work, turned out to have a lot of potential and a lot of ability. And work rates for single mothers went up dramatically, poverty rates dropped. So I do think that government, has got weaknesses, but one of the most important ones is to send the right messages. And I think one about work is important. I also think we should support work. If you go to work and the income that you make from wages are not sufficient to support a family for a variety of reasons, your level of skill or the nature of the national economy or competition that employers can't afford to pay you more, well, there's nothing wrong with government programs coming in and trying to shore up those wages to make them go a little further and find ways to help you with child care or help you with your health care if the wage alone is not enough. And then third, I think that you really have to talk about family. It's accepted. The bipartisan report I did with scholars from Brookings and from the left and the right, everybody agreed marriage matters. And we shouldn't not say that and not be willing to acknowledge that two parents, active and involved, there for the long haul, and that usually happens in marriage, leads to better outcomes for children on average. Now that doesn't mean that individuals don't do great jobs, and we can find ways to help kids who grow up in a different environment do well too, but we shouldn't be agnostic about the importance of two parents and actively involved. And then finally, the economy matters too. I mean, people in social services, I come from that world, as you said, I spent 20 years. I used to be surrounded by people who were worried about any initiative that might be good for business, because maybe it'll be a tax reduction, it'll take money away from us that we could use, or maybe it's a distraction. And I used to say, what are you kidding? If the business community is not prospering, if they're not hiring, if they're not growing, we have a lot harder time helping Americans and helping New Yorkers. And when the economy got going in New York in the periods that I was there and we could find jobs easily, it became that much easier. And then finally, civil society and government. I'm sorry to get off on a track, but I know you got Tim Carney earlier, and I want to reiterate something I know that he says. We do a great disservice in government when we don't reach out to faith-based organizations to be partners, or when we pass legislation that makes it harder for faith-based organizations to do their jobs. I remember when I was in New York, one of the great great stories of government and faith-based organizations relationship. Mayor Koch was doing an event with Cardinal O'Connor, and they were great friends and partners, although came from entirely different backgrounds. And they were talking about a joint initiative, and you all have been to these sorts of things, these press conferences, and then they had what's called off-topic questions. And so that was over, and they were celebrating this initiative, and then the reporter raised his hand and said, well, Cardinal O'Connor, what are you going to do about this new legislation that passed in the city council that the mayor's office says that they support, that's going to require you to do something or comply with a mandate from the state? And Cardinal O'Connor, who ran Catholic Charities and the other institutions of the Archdiocese that provided more help to more New Yorkers than maybe any other institution in the city, said, well, if they pass that mandate, we won't be able to provide those services, and we'll have to close our various programs. And Mayor Koch looked at him and looked at the crowd, and then he said, well, then I won't be signing that legislation, because we can't get in the way of institutions that do have that great one-on-one relationship in helping individuals that government can't do by telling them they have to do it our way or this way, and not some way that's consistent with their values. So I have to, those are my require work, reward work, talk about family, promote a strong economy, and always have great, strong partnerships with civil society and faith-based institutions.
That's great. And one of the things that I can tell I'm going to have a hard time getting you to say anything.
Sorry.
I'm going to have to just pull words out of you. But one of the things that Tim says is that, civil society is not just a way to address poverty and fight poverty, create opportunity, but it's a bulwark against despair and hopelessness, right? Another thing that we've talked about at GCO is the idea that at a time where politically, and this is a pretty diverse room in terms of how people vote in the last presidential election, last gubernatorial election, it's diverse here. But one of the things that we've talked about at GCO is that work at the community level, within our communities, practical work, is a bit of an antidote for some of what divides us, right? Because suddenly you're working side by side with somebody. One thing I'd ask you, because you're in DC and there's no more polarized city in the country than Washington, DC.
It's very good to get out of Washington.
Well, welcome to Atlanta. Yeah. Enjoy your Southern hospitality.
Thank you.
But one of the things that you mentioned was like the partnership with Brookings, center-left group, with AEI, center-right group. That's worked well, and it's important to have those kinds of conversations. Talk about why AEI, why Arthur and others have really considered those kinds of conversations important. It's countercultural in DC for you engage in those kinds of conversations.
Well, frankly, because it's the only way you can really together move forward as a country is if we engage with people who don't see things exactly as we do in a positive and civil way and reason together. In the world that I come from, this efforts to help struggling Americans, there's actually an awful lot that we agree on. When I was the chair of the National Hunger Commission, it was appointed by the Democratic leadership and the Republican leadership of the Congress. We had big differences of opinion, but we agreed on lots of things that were significant, if we could move them forward, would be significant advances for struggling Americans. So it is true that the headline of the day, which gets us all riled up and divides us, can make it seem like that's the only thing that happens in the halls of government, either at the State House or in federal government in Washington. But the fact is that little by little, other things happen where people of good faith and reasonable attitudes get together and hammer out an agreement, and legislation passes, and advances do occur. And I think I do plead guilty that I am not, while I'm the American Enterprise Institute, and we are a free enterprise, free markets, limited government institution, we do believe that government has a role. We're not anti-government. We don't want to blow it up entirely. And I think that if you look at the history of the United States, there are many, many times where people of good faith got together and created something in government that has moved us forward without interfering in the activities of faith-based or civil society. So I know that when you read the headlines, you can feel like it's just a complete mess. But in my experience in New York with Governor Pataki, or New York City with Mayor Bloomberg, or even in the last 5 years in Washington, it's not exactly that way underneath the headlines. I'm going to give you a couple examples. During the Trump administration, last 2 years, two significant pieces of reform. You may not like these pieces of legislation, but two significant pieces of reforms took place in the area of business that all of you are concerned with, that had been hampered, actually three, but had been really hampered in the previous 8 years. So one of them was there was a significant increase in the funding for child care aid to the states so they could help support low-income families who have child care needs. I mean, I like that idea, but there was a lot of desire to get it done. It couldn't happen. It happened in the last couple of years. Second, they did change the funding stream on foster care so that it has an opportunity to do more in preventive services, and so that all the money just doesn't go to care for kids after they're taken out of the family and placed in foster care or group homes. And that had been a concern of many, that all the focus was on treatment of kids in difficult families and not enough on prevention. That was a big change. President Obama wanted it. Republicans, conservatives in Congress wanted it. Didn't happen, didn't happen, didn't happen. Passed in the last couple of years. And the third was criminal justice reform. Again, doesn't get, all the treatment in the headlines, but if you ask people in that world, in Washington, they'll say something happened there that did happen. It passed. It was a step, not as much as we'd want, or there are other things we want more, but it was progress. So I do believe that outside of the headlines, Americans of good faith work together and do make change that leads to positive outcomes.
That's great. I want to return to the topic of work for a minute. At GCO, we often talk about the fact that work is more than just a source of income. It's a source of pride and purpose, provides one with the sense of well-being that comes with, being part of a creative process, right? Enjoying the fruits of one's labor, what Arthur calls earned success. All those things are good about work. There's an increasing emphasis on work. We've got historically low unemployment rates. From your perspective, because there's even disagreement on how much we should promote work. From your perspective, what role do you see employment playing in the well-being of individuals and their ability to progress?
Well, it's a huge role. And the income role is not small. I mean, only 3% of Americans who work full-time, full year are classified as being in poverty. So work does lead to higher incomes. And when you are in situations where the work is not enough to make you completely self-sufficient, there are various programs, the Earned Income Tax Credit, SNAP benefits, public health insurance, that can shore up your household's total income by supplementing those wages. And those take you significantly above the poverty line. So I am just a very firm believer in the benefit of work for your income. And Mayor Bloomberg used to say, we will never say, and I hope I don't want to, we will never say that there's a dead-end job or that job's not good enough. Every job is a step up for a person that has no job. And so I believe it's very important. It also orders your life. It brings you into a community. It gives you a dignity and sense of self-respect. It makes you healthier. There's a lot of evidence that people who work are more likely to be healthy than people who don't work at all. So I think it's a big ingredient. It's not everything, but it is a huge step in the right direction. And having an economy that's this strong is very good. It's better than the other way. And now what's a little bit disturbing is that even with unemployment at 3.7%, and even with more job openings than there are people seeking jobs, which is the situation in the United States, the labor force participation rate, that is the percentage of people 25 to 55 who are in the labor force, is still a little bit below what it used to be. And for men, it's significantly below. Maybe as many as 6 million men are sort of unaccountably still not either looking for work or working. And that is a concern. Now, I happen to believe that part of the reason for that is that we provide various forms of aid, mostly from the federal government, but aid that doesn't care about work. So I ran the Medicaid program in New York City. I ran the SNAP program in New York City. The federal government's instructions in those programs was to determine eligibility, hand them the card, and say, see you in a year. Now, the reason they came was because they didn't have income to afford those things, health care, health insurance, and because they weren't working. And we addressed the problem, that problem, but we didn't get behind that and say, can I help you get a job? Can I help you address the reason why you're here seeking government aid for food or for health care coverage? And to me, that was a crime. The program should be required to be concerned about employment. And that means asking and saying, how can I help you? Can I send you a message when there's a job opening? Can I encourage you to work? Because that's going to be, in the long term, in your best interests. Now, I also happen to think the person applying should be told, now, if you make no effort to go to a training program or to show up at a place where there are job opportunities or to work with an entity that wants to help you fill out a resume, if you're not going to make any effort at all at that, then your benefits are going to be at risk. And now that sounds tough and strong and mean. We did it in New York City, in a culture of a city that would be normally against it. And the people that supported it the most were people from communities that struggled and was full of working people that got up every day and went to work. And they said, we do it. And it's, maybe not easy. It may not be our favorite thing every day, but there's no reason why the government program that provides aid should say, here's your card, see you in a year. And I think that work thing still needs to be talked about. To be honest, I'm a little disappointed in the Trump administration. I think they've done some things on this, but they've pretty much left it alone. And more reform is needed. And I think it's one of the reasons why we still have this slightly off labor force participation rate, even when we're at full, unemployment is 3.7%.
So one of the things that we've noticed in working on the ground, again, when you're working on the ground and partnering with groups in different ways, you find people of common cause and of goodwill, and we may not align on all the political issues, but it kind of doesn't matter, right? You're just focused on the community. And one of the things that I think actually people are in agreement on is the value of work, actually. I mean, I just don't know anybody who doesn't think that just as work is more than just a source of income for themselves, it's more than a source of income for others. And what I want for myself and my own loved ones, I ought to want for my neighbor, no matter who they are and where they are. Tell us a little bit about the history here as much as you can. Why is the system the way it is? Why does it's nobody, look, I say this all the time, no matter how well-intended the program is, and I believe the programs have been well-intended, it's how do you help people in need? But how did we end up here where work is not rewarded, sometimes punished, and even family formation is sometimes punished?
Well, I think it was a product of good intentions, that it's also easier. I mean, it's easy for government to write a check or to provide a benefit. It's a little harder to set up a program and that requires personal responsibility. It also is easier. The previous spokesman talked about metrics and numbers and counting, and that's all true. And you know what the easiest thing to do in a program of this sort is to count the number of people that are receiving your benefit. To judge the success of your program by how many people you signed up. And look at this, look at what I did, look at how much I spent. And I think that's part of it, that it's just easier. I recognize that the philosophy that we brought to bear in New York and in the welfare reform period is a little more complicated, and it's a little edgier, it's a little harder to explain. But it's I think ultimately more successful. It's proven to be more successful. So I think that's one reason. I think on family, all kinds of cultural things happened. I think that sort of led us to astray and away from the benefits of two active and involved parents married in the raising of children. But my view is that government does have a bad habit of going to the easiest thing. And the easiest thing is to write a check. And but I did want to point out one thing to not-for-profit and faith-based providers that I found in New York. If you have a program that is seeking people to come in their door and ask for help, you're ready to go. You're going to provide services of some kind, say employment services. If you have a government that is not with you in talking about these values, it's harder for people to face that I've got to go seek that help from that environment, that community-based organization. And I worry that there's a crowding out that's also happened. The government has sort of moved in and made it less likely in some circumstances for someone who really could benefit from the services provided by the community-based organization to seek them. And I think that's a shame.
Yeah. Well, and I think that previous panel with the foster care panel kind of showed where government has been actually quite cooperative, right, overall. They recognize their own limitations and the differences are made on the ground through organizations like that. But that's absolutely right. I believe that there is often some sort of crowding out. Now, Robert, you've stepped into this role at AEI. So you've gone from strictly focusing on
Yes,
poverty
yeah,
studies
yeah.
to all sorts of issues that go beyond that. Talk a little bit about the future of AEI, what your plans are at this point, and what we might expect.
So the AI has been around for 45, 50 years. It's very well respected. It's a wonderful platform. And don't trust me, go to our website, aei.org, look at our writing. We write about foreign and defense issues. We write about domestic policy issues. We write about the economy. And I've just created a new organization called Social, Cultural, and Constitutional Studies that is going to focus on the underpinnings of American society, our Constitution, civil society, what makes us a people that have had some success as a nation over the years, and how far have we gotten away from those key ingredients. So my goal is to have AEI be the place where people of great research ability and empirical study ability and knowledge and writing can come, be able to do their work freely. We don't take official positions. AEI doesn't have a position. We hire people and we free them up to do good work, and then we publish and promote it. And so I think we're good in many areas. We could be better in some others. And so I've created this new institution. I think we need to work. We're a little bit out of the discussion over immigration, which is a very controversial issue. AEI, I think, is a leading institution, should have a strong immigration scholar. I think we're a little weak on energy and the environment. That's another area that I'd like to be better. But the most important thing I want to say is that we are the American Enterprise Institute in that we believe fervently in our country. And my number one thing is that the people that we bring to AI, the people that we nurture, the people that we support their work, are always doing it with a desire to make the country stronger, make the country better, make the country more true to its promise and its capabilities. And so that's what I'm about. I do have to change my focus a little bit. I was really focused, and I love this world that I come from, the world that all of you are in. It really is where I'm most at home. I've been going to conferences of this side, for 25 years, a long time of this kind, and I'll continue that. But my goal is to make AEI the leading voice for free market, free enterprise, freedom-focused research and public policy in the country. We are, in many respects, already, and I want to maintain that. I guess I'd say one other thing. I mean, if you haven't noticed, our politics in the country and our public policy machinations are a little bit in flux. It's kind of a mess. And I really want AEI to be a leader to help bring us back together and to move us forward as a country. Now, we're not wilting flowers. We're going to have some people that are going to say very strong things and are going to be very controversial. So just because I'm for bringing people together doesn't mean I'm not for allowing people to say bold and dramatic things about public policy, and we'll have a lot of that too.
I love that. I think one of the things that actually is a measure of true tolerance is not how we get everybody to agree with us, but how we actually have constructive conversations with people who disagree with us. It's being respectful about differences, I think, more than anything else.
Just to give you another example, one of the things that these sorts of gatherings I think are so useful. We are in the business, we want to have a gathering where sometimes conservatives, sometimes certainly Republicans and conservatives, that we tend to sometimes hang around with people that all look like ourselves. And that's bothered me. AEI is part of that history. And I'd like to change that. So sometime in the next couple months, we're going to have a gathering of people who see things on a right-of-center view and are leaders in their communities in that regard, but are Asian American and African American and Latino American. And we want to bring them together and be a convener of a community that nurtures that and the people who aren't all like us. And so that's also part of my agenda.
Well, thank you, Robert. Well, everybody thank Robert with me. And thanks.